He is in the company of Riley Sheehan, the American, riding for NSN, the Swiss registered team, and they have Martin Reisenberg. I'm pleased to say I got that one right. The tall Dutchman riding for Unibet Rose Rocket. So at the moment those three are clear, but that won't be it, I'm absolutely certain. You can see from the swirling, snaking peloton, there's a couple of riders on the front that don't want to be there, and I'm absolutely certain there will be some more pinball pings off the front of this peloton to get themselves up into the breakaway. Three going into the cobbles would be a long day out for these three, despite how strong they are. And Sheehan is an excellent cobbles rider, of course, as well. Very good bike handler.
Yeah, I mean, they've got 15 seconds. There's plenty of races. There are a lot of races in the world where you would say, yeah, this is it, this is the break. Just want to see what the front of the bunch is doing, because that's a decent sized gap. No, there are still, you're right, Jez, there's still a certain amount of activity there, although looking at the shape of the bunch, it's not going absolutely flat out. There's a lot of riders getting to the front, taking a dig, look over their shoulder, go again. I mean, modern pro cycling will be cross that they've missed this one. But they're not really doing an awful lot about it just yet. I don't know, maybe they're assuming that somebody else is going to pull it back and they'll go on the counter.
Yeah, of course, we've still got plenty of gilets on at the moment, which probably doesn't help with our rider IDing from up here. Can't see any numbers at all as we look down on the long, long road which is going northeastward out of Compiègne. Riley Sheehan, who's up the road, by the way, I mentioned how good he is on multi-terrain races, and I thought, now, what was I'm trying to remember what the big race was that he won in his first year. I was commentating on it. It was Paris Tour, of course, which he won from a leading group. Anyone that can win the new version of Paris Tour is going to be on for a good day on a day like this. Niels Pollitt. Niels Pollitt is arguably the kind of George Hincapie of the modern generation. He's a man for whom this race means so much. He's been 4th, 2nd and 7th in 9 rides in this race at Paris-Roubaix, I should say. But a rear wheel puncture early on, by the looks of it, or a rear wheel issue anyway, for Niels Pollitt. How on earth are people having punctures on this road, Hutch? And while it's dry too, that's not a good sign.
Yeah, well, it's not. Just bad luck. I mean, you do see punctures on the road sections of Paris-Roubaix fairly regularly.
Yeah.
But it's it's funny looking back at this point on, you know, the kind of the skinny tyres that people used to ride this race on, kind of 22, 23 mil tyres, things like that.
Yeah.
And so many of the teams now big up to kind of big fat 35 mil balloon tyres.
We'll come back to tyres in just a moment, actually, because it's been an interesting debate. I talked about Peter Sagan earlier with Sylvain Dillier going into the finish, and we heard from Peter Sagan, former winner, of course, former world champion, just before the start.
Tadej Pogacar is just another level. He's in the space. But at the Roubaix, it's totally different story. And it's so hard that nobody knows how he's going to finish. Because we saw all favorites already before. There was Cancellara, Bon, and you know, maybe sometimes it's just stars going together, and who is lucky guy is going to win. So last year there was the battle between Van der Poel and Pogacar, and I have to say Tadej did just mistake. Crash because he's fallen in the corner, and after he never come back, because I think it's much easier to race for Tadej when it's some hard kicks or mountains. But the Roubaix is almost flat, you know. It's gonna be hard for Tadej to drop Van der Poel, because it's just totally different race. From big 5, he won already 4. Tadej can do everything, but Roubaix is just special. It's like 80% of the chance that every rider is going to puncture during the day, you know? Every sector or every moment could be crucial. As for me, I won Roubaix and I went in the breakaway on the asphalt, you know, and not even in the cobblestones. But after I get the first group, luckily we work together and we get to the finish. Every moment is important in Roubaix.
Great to hear from the former three-time world champion, Peter Sagan, winner of this race, as we saw there in 2018, when he beat Sylvain Dillier in the sprint as well. Dillier back in the race today. We've seen him already. That was him wearing his Swiss champions jersey, of course. Dillier, he still has those Swiss champs logos around his sleeves, but he now rides, of course, for Alpecin Premier Tech. He's riding for Angers de la Mondiale on that occasion there, the French team. That stat was really interesting. Of course, it's not an official one, Hutch, but the talk about 80% of the field puncturing. You mentioned the 35 millimetres earlier. You know, so much talk about tyre width this week. What do we know in terms of what you say is the average tyre width, and what are most teams going for, Hutch?
There's a real mix this year between 32 and 35. Last year it was mainly 32 mil tyres, a few more up to 35 mil this year, particularly Continental sponsored teams, because Continental have done a new 35mm edition of their GP 5000 TR tyre. So a lot of teams have gone up to that if they can fit it in the bike. I think I read somewhere that Tadej Pogacar is running a 32 on the front and a 35 on the back, simply because there isn't space in the Colnago frame for a 35mm tyre on the front. So I think most of the teams who have access to a 35mm tyre from their sponsors will be running it. A few that some of the ones that don't will be on 32, but it's in and around there. I don't think there's going to be anybody in the race running anything narrower than a 32.
I do scratch my head sometimes in the week leading up to this, Hutch, while I try and stay on top of all the news that's coming out about the tech, and then I suddenly start to think, maybe it's a bit cynical, but I think, well, hang on a minute, this is such... Paris-Roubaix in particular is a wonderful marketing tool because it gives us an opportunity to talk about tech, and it gets kind of sent wider and further afield, if you look at Mads Pedersen, than it would normally, because there's always a build-up to this. And one thing that's changed over the history of this race, as we know, is that these riders cannot be using anything on their bikes or made up of their bikes that cannot be bought by the general public. That's the change that's happened in the last, 10 years, isn't it? And so they have to be very, very careful with that. One team that I think has fallen foul of that, although I think it'll have ongoing repercussions, is, of course, Melissa Bike, who've been preparing their wheels, their bikes for weeks, if not months, expecting to use the Gravard system, something we talked about a lot last year, with this sort of self-inflating and then deflating, the ability that a rider can pump up and then release the pressure of their tyres in between the cobbled sectors. They received a letter from the UCI saying that they wouldn't be allowed to use it. That's a very, very late change. If I believe what I read, I think it was middle of this week or something like that they actually got the notification. And so, as far as we know, Hutch, no Gravard system being used in the race. But we have seen that system that Legal Trek are using. What did I say it was called? It's the Odyssey system, which is slightly different. What do you know on all this?
The Gravard, the company that made the system that Visma have used in the past, went bankrupt in January. The UCI banned the system a couple of weeks ago on the basis that it's not commercially available. They informed Visma that they couldn't use it. At the minute, you can actually buy it off the website. Either the administrator or somebody's bought the company. So, I think there might be an argument that'll go on about that, because at the minute it looks kind of commercially available to me, but in practice the UCI may know something I don't, in the sense that the UCI may well know that it's simply not actually available. The Little Trek system, as you said, it's a kind of a mountain bike system. They're running a tougher version of an inner tube inside the tyre, a bit like one of those foam inserts. That's blown up to 6 bar of pressure. So the idea is that if you have a problem with the tubeless system, you've kind of got a backup, and you can ride on the tyre supported by that inner tube until you can get a wheel replacement. Clearly, it doesn't work if the tyre comes off the rim and all manner of chaos breaks loose, but if what you have is a fairly conventional puncture, hopefully at least it would let Mads Pedersen, for example, get off the cobble section to wherever he can find a team helper who will give him a whole spare tyre, or even get a spare bike from the team car.
Yeah, you know how I feel about tubeless. Anyway, Hutch, maybe I'll go there with that a little bit later on. the tubeless with a tube, it kind of proves my point, but there we go. That's just my little take. So, our three in the breakaway are still there, but they've been joined by another Dutchman. Kees Bol of XDS Astana has ridden across them by himself, and that must show some kind of good form. We know how strong Kees Bol is anyway, but to get across when others wanted to by yourself is a little indication that Kees Bol, I think we can say, is going rather well.
Jazz, just before people start riding in, he's decathlon, not XDS Astana.
What did I say? XDS, oh dearie me. Where did that come from? Where on earth did that come from?
Yeah,
yes, of course, sorry.
You're falling apart already.
I am falling apart.
You haven't even reached the cobbles yet and you're in trouble.
It's a long day out, isn't it? Thank you for pointing that one out. Yes, he is, of course, now a decathlon CMA CGM team rider, although it looks like the peloton is closing up the gap behind those four. Niels Pollitt very steadily riding his way back through the convoy, having had that rear wheel change. And Hutch, as we look at the Colnago under Niels Pollitt here, that's what fascinates me about this race. Seemingly, the technological gains are held between being able to rattle across baby's head size cobblestones and maintain control and grip and all the rest of it, but then also be as aero as you possibly can be in between them. And as you've already hinted at, fitting whacking great, almost gravel width, well, they are gravel width sized tyres, into a close-fitting aerofoiled frame is not the easy thing to do. No, and it's a one-off. Crucially, it's a one-off race, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a lot of sort of fascinating bodges to condemnatory, where there are a lot of kind of interesting compromises that people are picking their way through. And Paris-Roubaix has always been like that. In fact, technologically these days, Paris-Roubaix is probably closer to normal cycling than it's been at any point in its lifetime. We've seen in the past sort of full suspension mountain bikes, the Bianchi full suspension bikes in the 1990s that famously probably cost Johan Museeuw a win at Paris-Roubaix. But these days, yeah, it's generally fairly standard kit, a lot of wheel tech, bigger tyres, a few other odds and ends of things like the little Trek kind of fakey inner tubes, things like that. But they're fairly normal. I actually quite admire the fact that Visma Lease bike pretty much turned up with their normal bike, standard bike, standard group set, standard wheels, slightly fatter tyre. That's it. They haven't really done anything much at all. They've turned up with a bike that they could ride, they would take to a Tour de France stage.
Yeah. Well, on the topic of all those different things, and we've not even got on to chainring size and what have you yet, there does come a point, doesn't there? If you've been watching the cycling news all week and following on social media, so much talk about it. We roll out of Compiègne, we ride northeastward towards the cobbles, and suddenly we stop talking about it because it literally becomes about the bare-knuckle cobble fight that is Paris-Roubaix. So there we go, it's all coming back together again now. So that was a nice move. Kees Bol making his way across and actually really pushing on to try and keep those four clear, but we are back together again. And the next of interviews we're going to be bringing you, by the way, is with Tadej Pogačar himself. I'll bring you that in just a moment as we see the next 3 or 4 riders going off the front. Beautiful scenes looking down on northern France in the spring. Sunshine, a field of rapeseed oil off to their right in bright yellow, and 2 more riders now go off the front. Looks like Stan de Wolf is one of them for Decathlon CMA CGM. And when we just pan right, we should see 2 or 3 more riders trying to come across to these two. We've had one breakaway of 4 already that's been brought back in. And the Bahrain victorious. Go on.
Alessandro Borgo.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Just 2 at the moment, though. And there is what's coming after them. It looks very much like the figure of Dries de Bont for Jaco Alula, trying to get into the breakaway. No great surprise there. One of the elder statesmen of this peloton now at 34 years of age. He is also the rider who's got the most kilometres of racing logged this year. I remember this from last year, seeing the motocross. What a fantastic opportunity to see this. Of course, Eurosport has long been the home of motocross as well. That looks like fun. What was I saying? Yes. Dries de Bont, I'll give you the figure. 4,539 kilometres raced so far this year, certainly according to his Pro Cycling Stats page. He has raced the most of all these riders, the vastly experienced Belgian for Jaco Alula. Even he is being marked out on the front at the moment. It is, you're absolutely right, Hutch. It's Van der Wulf and Bordeaux as well, the two of them. I don't think, looking ahead, I've just gone and checked again now the weather forecast, I don't think we're going to get any more rain today either. So we are looking, it is remarkable, isn't it, that we're looking at yet another dry, dusty conditions one. The last one we had that wasn't, that was properly wet and muddy anyway, was, it seems like a long time ago now, Sonny Colbrelli winning, of course, ahead of Florian Vermeers and Mathieu van der Poel in that velodrome sprint. They were absolutely caked in mud. The best one I seem to remember, and you'll probably remember this, Hutch, I'm sure, as well. I'm trying to think of the year now. It would have been... it's going a long way back. The last very muddy one would have been... I think it was Ballerini's win in 1998. As far back as that, I can remember seeing... In fact, I can remember seeing George Hincapie, who we've just seen interviewed, absolutely covered in mud. Yeah, that was fully muddy. That was like cyclocross on that occasion. We haven't had those kind of conditions for, well, an awfully long time now, since then, really.
No, Colbrelli's win, of course, was in October. That was the year of the October Paris-Roubaix. And when that happened, lots of people said, oh, let's move it to October all the time. It'll always rain. We've had a couple of had a wet Grand Prix Dinan last year, I think.
Yes.
If you like kind of watching people racing in the mud, I think that's probably still available on YouTube somewhere. But that had some absolute sort of classic, those kind of classic horrible crashes where people just slip sideways going in a straight line. So somebody's riding over the cobbles at 48, 50 kilometres an hour, and suddenly they're on the ground. It's yeah, you have to be a very special sort of cycling fan, I think, to enjoy that.
Good to see Arnaud Delis here, leading his Lotto Entourmarché team. He's had only one ride so far in Paris-Roubaix and one finish, therefore. He was 50th on debut in 2023. He is someone who I think a lot of people expect could ride a good Paris-Roubaix. Let's see. He's actually riding alongside Toon Aerts there, who makes his debut in this race, the Belgian cyclocross superstar. There is Toon Aerts, so two top Belgians in the Belgian team, Lotto Entourmarché. Next move is being led by Flanders Baloise in the yellow, blue and white. They are riding their, well, unless anything changes, I'd love to think it would, but they as a team are riding their last Paris-Roubaix here as well. They will definitely want to have a rider in the breakaway. But not just yet, by the looks of things. First team to attack today, if you weren't with us from the very off, the flag drop, was the team of Modern Adventure Pro Cycling, George Hincapie's newly formed American team, and here they are in this move as well, by the looks of it. Hutch, just while we're on together, because it won't be too long until we hand over to Joe Rousel and Brian Smith. Before we do, can I touch on, we've talked about the big five races, the monuments. If we're in Flanders a week ago, we were talking about the big five there, and we included Remco Evenepoel in that. In this one, are we just swapping a Remco Evenepoel for a Filippo Ganna? So let me give you what I've suggested, the big five. The big five today, I would suggest, I want you to tell me if I'm right or wrong, Mathieu van der Poel, Tadej Pogacar, Wout van Aert, Mads Pedersen, there's our four, and then, as you say, you swap out your Remco Evenepoel for your Filippo Ganna. The two-time trialists, as you'll be pleased to know, make up that fifth rider. Is that the top five, or is there anyone else we should be including, the biggies?
It's probably the top five. As soon as you say that, I start looking down for other people and saying, is Gianni Vermeer, should he be in there? Things like that. But no, I think those are the five clear team leaders who I think we're looking at. There are a lot of other riders I'm really fascinated to see. I'm really curious to see how Alex Segart goes, given the season he's doing, and he, of course, won Grand Prix Dinan, which is the sort of a mini Paris-Roubaix. Curious to see about him, curious to see Jonas Abramson. There's a lot of other riders, but yeah, I wouldn't argue with your top five, your big five.
Well, I don't think I've exactly stuck my neck out there either. Yeah. I think they are the big five that everyone's been talking about. We just caught a glimpse there, by the way, of a rider who kind of slipped my notice coming into this race, and it's Jonathan Milan. He's had 6 wins this year already, the Italian, for Lidl Trek, and he is in Mads Pedersen's team. A very strong team as well. Lots of big boys in there, dare I say it, with Matthias Vacek, Max Volschein, Jonathan Milan. Mads Pedersen's going to have plenty of shelter, I'd have thought, should he need it today, to keep him protected and out of the wind. These 3 still just dangling off the front. Burgo and De Wolf have been joined by one of the Modern Adventure Pro cycling riders. While we watch them coming back in, I think it's Robin Carpenter again who's tagged onto the back of this group. A man who has lots of breakaway experience. While we watch them, though, we're going to hear from the man himself, Tadej Pogačar, the world champion, and his thoughts prior to this edition of Paris-Roubaix.
It's your first Roubaix on the aero frame. How has it been to ride the cobbles in the recon on the aero frame?
Yeah, it was really good, and I think in Paris-Roubaix the technology, the tires, the frames are always developing, because it's not as targeted as the road bikes. I mean, as for the road. So there's always still room for improvement, but I think we definitely did upgrade from last year, but I think everybody is doing upgrades for the year to come.
Is there any room for wider tires in that frame?
Not that much, not so much, yeah.
35? Are you starting with 35 millimeters?
Yeah, the front is 35, the back I still keep 32, yeah.
Finally today, we saw when you did recon with Vermeersch, you were so muddy. And Vermeersch said that you crashed on Harvey sector. What happened that day in the recon back in March?
Yeah, man, it was so muddy. It was not even cobbles, so we were basically riding on the field, and I crashed twice, but luckily it was so much mud on the cobbles I didn't get hurt.
Thank you. Good luck.
But so dirty.
A bit of intel about that crash there as well. So. Tadej Pogačar seems to cope rather well with crashing. We often forget. I'd actually forgotten, of course, until we saw the clip of him winning Milan-San Remo, that he, of course, crashed there too, as did a lot of the favourites, Mathieu van der Poel included. But it's about how you deal with these things and keep going. And talking of keeping going, more riders trying to get across to that break, including Fedorov there, the Kazakh road race champion for XDS Astana. Well, this is going to go on, I think, for quite some time, by the look of it, as we continue to see these attacks going. Dr. Michael Hutchinson, I'm going to thank you for now. And, you know, I'm the only person here that hasn't got very important letters before and after my name. I'm going to hand over to 2 other people who also have very important letters after their names, and they are, tell me if I get this wrong, Joe Rousel, MBE Ollie, and Brian Smith Ollie. I'm in illustrious company. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning. Thanks for the intro there, Jez. Yeah, you've got that spot on. So yeah, the OLY after the name, the post-nominals there for Olympians, which I think is nice that we can have that. And of course, Brian Smith, who's going to be joining me, former pro, former British champion, and Olympian as well. So yes, we're very grateful that we can add the OLY post-nominals. And yeah, thanks for the intro, Jez. I love how we were talking before we came on air about how we were going to sort of hand over at the start, and of course we've got all the pavé sectors coming up that we all know so well about, and we sort of had a little chat about how we might switch over at the start and wait for the break to form and then switch, and I think we were very wishful thinking that 30 kilometres we'd have a break forming, but there was a point where I thought, when we had that group of 4 away, that this might be it, and I optimistically got out my highlighter pen and highlighted the 4 riders on the start sheet that were in that breakaway. And of course that's come back, so I wasn't even on air, but I've already had the curse of the commentator making sure that breakaway didn't survive. So there we go. No breakaway just yet with 2:27 to go.
No, indeed. Joe, one thing before I hand over, don't forget Brian's a double British champion. He has been known to get a little upset just being called a one-time British champion. It's 2 times British champion, Brian Smith.
Right,
just to get that in now, because I've been picked up on it, and rightly so.
Rightly so, Jez. Well, thank you very much. We'll hear from you again in, I don't know, about an hour or so. We'll see how we get on with when will this break form. Just seeing Binyam Gamay on our screens now, and I can welcome Brian to the broadcast. Welcome along, Brian.
Morning, Joe.
How are you feeling about this race today? I mean, we were just chatting just there about when this break might go, and I'm guessing you're not too surprised that we're still in this situation after, what, 30k of racing?
No, I'm not surprised at all. Look, what we're talking about Pogacar and Van der Poel show, and when you're in that situation, you know, and we heard from George Hincapie about the situation they've got of, you know, the goals for today, I think, is just to infiltrate the breakaway and maybe try and get top 30. Maybe that's the modest goals that they've got. So it's really no surprise. You can clearly see a lot of riders just sitting and waiting, but there's a lot of teams that have been told to get themselves in the breakaway, and a little bit like what happened last week in Ron van Vlaanderen. They're kind of cancelling each other out. Of course, a small group of 3 or 4 is going to find it very, very difficult, but there's a lot of riders and teams know that they can't go toe-to-toe with the top 2 in this race. There are some riders like Mads Pedersen that are hoping to get there, Wout van Aert, maybe a couple others that may think they can compete with these guys. I don't think they can. I think we've got a top 2 in this race, and if you've got that situation, Joe, then how are you going to compete against that? You can't compete against them when they decide to start racing. So what you want to do is get yourself in a breakaway and hope you can get a good result out of this. As Jess said earlier on, we had 2 riders that managed to get in the breakaway last year. They got themselves top 10. So for a top 10 for a team like this, that is possibly their goal. So that's why we're seeing a lot of attacks. That's why we're seeing a breakaway not going away, because they're cancelling each other out.
Just off for a short commercial break, but do stay tuned. We'll be back very soon. Just inside 225 kilometres to go then. Our cameras did pick out there with the graphics Benjamin Thomas, the rider from Cofidis, just trying to get into this breakaway. But as you're saying, Brian, everyone cancelling each other out. It's just fascinating to me that this race is the one where the breakaway can be the route to getting the top 10. Let's just pause here and just see Wout van Aert here. Christophe Laporte, I believe, just in front of him, just working their way back to the peloton. There's a lot of hearts out there, Brian, that are saying they want Wout van Aert, when we had a couple of our experts predicting him today. It's going to be a tough ask, though.
Yeah, of course it is. You know, he's ridden well. You know, the way he rode Dwado of Vlaanderen and just get pipped by Filippo Ganna come the end, who just happens to be in this same group. Coming back to the peloton, but yeah, Wout van Aert, there was a stage where it was only a matter of a few years ago, he's the eternal second, and you know, you have to think that, you know, maybe one day that he will have that chance of winning. Everything has to go his way, of course. You know, we've already been talking about it from the start. I think you mentioned that Hincapie and maybe a couple of others had started this race 17 times. I was a teammate of George, and although I rode the amateur version of this race, I was more in the climbing programme. You know, I was Basque Country and Catalonia rather than, you know, the Cobble Classics. But George was pretty much a Cobble Classics man. He loved these. He kind of lived for these races, and you know, from that interview that we did have, I think he'd be more nervous sitting in the team car today than he was possibly when he rode this race. I know I was when I was in the team car here. The pressure is on. We've actually got a race within a race, because we've got 30 sectors today. We're just seeing going over this roundabout here. We've got 30 sectors today, and in each one of these sectors you have to have a staff member with a pair of wheels and bottles. And of course, not every team has got the luxury of 30 staff members and 30 cars. So normally the teams will have a team of maybe 5 or 6, and they have to do maybe 4 or 5 sectors each. And you know, I've been in that situation, and it's crazy. Of course, no team cars can go onto the course unless it's the race car, and we've got deviations, so not all the team cars can go over all the cobble sections. So you're relying on people being there, because the last thing you want, Joe, is if you have a problem and there's nobody at the end of that sector. So there's a lot of racing around out with you know, the race that we're seeing at the moment. And of course, if you've driven over in a normal team car, you bottom out in some, because the centre is high in some of these sectors, and that's what we're talking about. When it's muddy, they were going down these sectors, and the back wheel, the wheels were just kind of slipping down, you know, from the middle of the kind of muddy crest of these pavy sectors. So there's a lot of hidden dangers. And getting back to, you know, what I was saying about George Hincapie, he's